Hello and welcome to our main message for March the 21st. It's the final message in this short series taken from the book of Revelation. I wish we had longer in many ways to get into the whole book much more thoroughly. If you've been following the series, you're probably just glad to get to the end of it. Next week and the week after, we'll be looking at the events of Good Friday and of Easter through the eyes of Mary Magdalene. So that's going to be something completely different. Uh, Today, we just finish off now the final vision in the book of Revelation. I love it to bits. This thing sets me on fire, and I'll try and not to catch fire while I'm doing this, because it actually uses up a lot of time as I get too excited. So today we're going to heaven, except John is very careful in describing his vision that, in fact, this is about the gospel, so it's really about heaven coming to earth. That's the direction. It's from God to us. It's a saving action which brings heaven to us. John is making his point very carefully, and we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, let me ask you to imagine something. This is quite easy. Two stars, right? Except I want you to imagine that they are 548,000 light years apart. Could you just get that in your head? Just imagine that 548,000 light years apart. How did that go? I bet the two stars bit started well enough, but how do you imagine 548,000 light years? Nobody can. And yet, it's true. There are stars that kind of distance apart. That's actually quite a small distance as the universe goes. And the universe is chock full of true distances, real things that can be measured and actually exist, but actually are beyond our capacity to imagine. You and I cannot imagine 548,000 light years as a distance. You can probably imagine a kilometre or a mile or a yard or a foot or a metre or something. You can imagine, maybe you could imagine 10 miles or 10 kilometres, but 548,000 light years, no, you can't imagine that. Neither can I. Not because it's not true, it's just unimaginable. Einstein had a little wrestle with that because Einstein could see things that other people couldn't see about the nature of the universe. He did an interesting thing to try and communicate with people what he could see. He called them thought experiments. They're sort of visionary in a sense. They are acts of the imagination. So he'd say something like, well, imagine there's two people, one on a train, one sitting in a station, both are studying their clocks. The train hurtles through the station at a really fast speed when it is struck by lightning. Well, that's a bit of a crazy vision, but I can get my head to actually imagine all that in one picture. And so what Einstein was doing is, instead of handing me an immensely complex formula to make me go, oh, I see it, he's beginning to say, let's think about this in pictures. So what the Bible is doing for us in the book of Revelation is saying there is truth that is beyond your imagination. And in the final vision, we are coming to the issue of heaven and eternity and our engagement with it in a full and final sense. And what John is saying to us in effect is, you can't possibly imagine the actual details. I can't. Doesn't mean they're not true, it just means they are not within the capacity of the human imagination. We can't picture it. So we're going to use a symbol, we're going to use a thought experiment, we're going to use picture language to take us to where we need to go and towards the understanding that we need to have. And he's going to take us into a thing in which he views heaven as if it were a city. He's not saying heaven is a city. This city is absolutely mind-blowing as he describes it. It's no less than 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles wide, and 1,500 miles high, which is a perfect cube because he wants to bring us into images of perfection. So it's a perfect shape. That's part of its structure, its architecture, if you like. It's got pearly gates. It's got a high street paved with the purest of gold. And the high street runs down either side of a river, which has the water of life in it, and where the tree of life grows and constantly, as a grove of trees, an avenue, constantly giving fruit and the leaves for the healing of all peoples. And there's no temple because God's fullness is there, and so on and so on. Lots and lots of details. Enjoy reading it. Just don't ever imagine that that's an exact description of heaven in physical detail, because it's not. The pearly gates are gates of value there, that they are gates of giant goodness and beauty. And they're gates which are open all the time. They're never locked because there's no threat to this heavenly city. This is the vision then that John calls the holy city, or the new Jerusalem. And it's based obviously on the purpose of Old Jerusalem, or Jerusalem on planet Earth in the ordinary sense of Jerusalem, a city in a country. Because Jerusalem in the Bible is the center of the kingdom, where God's name dwells in a temple. There's no temple in the heavenly city because God is personally there, and where the king reigns from the palace. And so this is the new center of God's eternal kingdom, the holy city, the new Jerusalem. So it's a picture. If you've ever sung that English hymn called Jerusalem, and did those feet in ancient times, that one, it never occurred to you, and I suppose that the hymn writer was kind of calling for us to bring the physical city of Jerusalem brick by brick, block by block, stone by stone, and build it somewhere in the UK. That clearly is not the meaning. The meaning is that the qualities, the ideals that belong to the new Jerusalem, this the Jerusalem of Revelation that the hymn writer's talking about, the qualities of mercy, freedom, compassion, justice, these are the things we should be building into the life of a country that is worth living in and worth serving and belonging to. And saying, so let's build that after God's model, which is shared with us through Christ and portrayed in the Bible. That's the point of the hymn. And I'm sure you got it. You never needed that explaining, really, but I chose to explain it just to show you that you already think of Jerusalem in a particular way. It has a meaning that's quite different to the physical city in Israel, but the meaning, the sense of it, it has a symbolic meaning as well. Now, before John takes us into the holy city, the new Jerusalem of his vision, he shares a different vision with us, which we haven't had time to go into. So when you've got a moment, and before you've forgotten all this bit, have a quick read of Revelation chapter 17 and 18, where the contrasting city called Babylon is described. Now, John undoubtedly had Rome in his mind when he describes Babylon, Babylon the harlot, Babylon that sells itself to greed, to every good trade deal, good in the sense that it makes me or mine richer, better off. It may make some others poorer, but I don't care about that. Babylon represents oppression, political and economic, military power used to oppress people. It's one of the great themes running through the book of Revelation. We met it very early on. And Babylon represents this. It's not about Babylon, the actual city of Babylon. It's a reference back to the Old Testament when the Babylonian Empire did to Israel what the Roman Empire was doing to Israel in different ways in the time of Christ and the writing of the New Testament documents. So we have a tale of two cities going on in the book of Revelation, and I'm not going to go into detail about Babylon. There just isn't time. It is fascinating. It is so misrepresented as being anti-feminine, which it isn't at all, anti-female leadership, which it isn't at all, and suspect female morals and so forth. It's not about that at all either. Adultery is strongly featured, but adultery is being used by John's vision in the same way that the prophets use it in the Old Testament. It's basically being unfaithful to God by the way you live, by ditching mercy, compassion, generosity, grace, and going for greed and self-centeredness and all those other things. So we have these two cities in the visions of the book of Revelation. John will refer to them briefly as two brides. They're both female. The New Jerusalem is described in female terms. Babylon is described in female terms. But it's the New Jerusalem that I want us to end with. So read Babylon for yourself. The message about how you organise the economic system of the world and the political system of the world, I think, is plain enough when you just read it. Let's hear the invitation that comes as the book of Revelation closes. The invitation to be part of God's future. As Good Friday's Lamb that was slain appears now as the morning star, or that signals and ushers in the dawn of a new day, a new future, which never falls tonight. It's a new day that will be everlasting. And it's a new scene in which God is not withdrawn from people, nor people from God, but God lives with people and people live with God. It's a new scene in which every tear is wiped away, death and grief and crying and pain, they are all in the past, done and dusted, forgotten as it were. This is something new. The entire creation that the Creator once made is now renewed, saved, and given its new future. There's a whole new heaven and a whole new earth, and God says, look, I'm making it all new. And that is the great Christian hope. That is what Colossians and other parts of the Bible tell us Jesus came to make possible. And it means that when we start following Jesus, we are people who have a home, an address, and a belonging to the New Jerusalem, the holy city, the condition of God's eternity, life with God forever. And John is reminding those who are interested in his book that he's been telling them, don't bow down to Babylon. Don't give in to the way of the world. Don't, even when it's in yourself, even when you discover your own prejudices, your own appetites, your own faults and failings, don't give in to any of that. That is all doomed destruction and a waste of time, space, your effort and your investment. Invest instead in the kingdom of heaven, the new city, because that's what's coming to you as the people of Jesus whose belonging is to God. The vision's not about details of heaven when you die. It's not even about going to heaven. It's about the more important things, about God with whom we share life forever. And it's about us understanding that God locates us with God's self forever, beyond the imagination, beyond what we can understand or even begin to think of in any clear way. John portrays this glorious city. It's inclusive, it's peaceful, it's fair, it's generous. And he says, this is what you belong to when you belong to God. Don't forget, if you're thirsty, if you've got an appetite for what I'm sharing, come to Christ. In the end, folks, this is not about do we go to heaven when we die. It's about, have I met God? And am I with God now and forever? The rest follows. The details beyond our capacity to imagine, and it really doesn't matter because it'll all be the gift of God. So you just need to trust God. You don't need to worry about the detail. What John finishes his book by saying to us is, look, in the end, at the end of your life, at the end of the history of the human race as we currently know it, there's God. God who gave it its beginning will also give it its end. And right now, our role as the followers of Jesus is to make it present even whilst Babylon still stands and has full sway in the world. We will be the citizens of the holy city, the New Jerusalem. God bless you, and I hope you've enjoyed this brief sortie into the book of Revelation.